Hello, friends. Dave Bjork here, lung cancer survivor, patient advocate, and yes, I'm the research evangelist. And welcome to the Research Evangelist podcast, coming to you as always from just outside of Boston. You know, the Greek meaning of evangelist is bringing the good news, and I like to think that I'm bringing the good news in cancer research and care by interviewing people in life sciences who are doing amazing work. I call them brilliant but not famous. And well, the not famous part is ironic because they're all well known and respected in their field by their peers and the communities that they serve. But my next door neighbor probably would not recognize their name. But they really are brilliant and committed to their work. I love meeting these amazing people and sharing a little bit about them and the work they're doing and things they're passionate about. And I also believe in serendipity. So I hope some positive things come from sharing their stories with all of you and to the universe. And so today I'm super excited to have on my show Dr. Hina Khan. And Dr. Khan is a medical oncologist who specializes in thoracic cancers and is an assistant professor at the Warren Alpert School of Medical School at Brown University. She practices at Rhode Island, the Miriam and Newport hospitals, and is board certified in internal medicine, hematology, and oncology. Dr. Khan received her medical degree from the Jawaharlal Nehru Medical College of Medicine in India, and she did her residency at Mount Sinai School of Medicine and her fellowship at Albert Einstein College of Medicine at Montefiore Medical Center. And Hina, it's so great to see you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. It's my pleasure and honor to be here.
Awesome. It's always great to see you. We recently shared the stage at the ACS CAN Rhode Island Research Breakfast. But of course, you and I have met previously because we do some common work together in the lung cancer world, small world. But let me start by having you tell us a little bit about the younger Hina Khan.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So I was born and raised in India. I did my education and early schooling in a town in the northern part of India called Lucknow. So that's sort of where I spent most of my life before I decided to move to the US. And that wasn't much later on in life after my medical training.
And so when you were younger, when did you realize that you wanted to be a doctor?
Yeah, so this is a very personal experience, and I love to share that because I feel like sometimes these experiences in childhood that really shape your entire life. I'm the first physician in my family. My dad is a civil engineer, and my mom is a high school science teacher. All with science backgrounds, but I was the first physician with my family, and how this all started up is as I was growing up, I had a very personal experience that, as I said, shaped everything else moving forward. I was 11, and my younger sister, who was about 4 or 5 then, she was diagnosed with ALL, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And, I was young and I had a younger brother and an older brother, and just sort of, watching my family and her go through this extremely difficult time. And I don't say me and my siblings because really my parents and my sister really went through all of that. And just seeing how the oncology team helped get them through all of that and get our family back to normal after a few years. It really just sort of changed my outlook. I was a preteen, and honestly, that wasn't something that most people have to live through or have to understand, but it gave me a very deep understanding of, how that changed everything about us. So I just knew then that if I can help one family like that in my lifetime, I think that's just worth everything to me. So I knew I wanted to go into medicine and be a doctor and just be able to help like that pediatric oncology team helped our family. And she's doing good. She's excellent, healthy, has a career, has a family. Everything's awesome because of that oncology team.
Yeah, yeah. What you were 11 at the time, so you were quite young. So did that influence as you kind of went forward into high school and thinking about post high school, where you were going to go and things like that? Did that kind of sort of evolve over time?
Yeah, no, so that really did. And, I just developed a much deeper interest as in high school in medicine and then college, more biology courses, of course, I went along. And I joined medical school, and that's sort of where I met my husband. And then after we finished our training is when and I knew I wanted to go into oncology eventually. We decided to pursue our further medical training here in the United States. So we moved from India over here to finish our residency and then went down for fellowship.
And so when you just said you mentioned that you knew that you wanted to go into oncology, was that again back to your sister's experience, or was there other connection points along the way?
Yeah, so I think, oncology really just was my calling from the very beginning. As I went through medical school, I did my medicine training and in internal medicine training and then internal and pediatric rotations. And initially it was more about pediatric oncology, but as I went through pediatric rotations, I soon realized that I have to really be in adult medicine. Pediatric medicine is it's really hard work, and you got to have a lot more to be able to handle all that emotional baggage. So I soon realized adult oncology is where I'm going to be headed. So when I moved over here to the United States, I joined internal medicine residency and went on to adult hematology oncology.
That's interesting. I always tell the story about my wife as a newborn ICU nurse
Hmm.
and has never taken care of adults her entire career as a nurse. And so she says, I could never take care of adults. And other people are like, I could never take care of babies. And so it's kind of the
Absolutely.
different
Yeah.
perspectives of, but you're right about that emotional work that is involved. And I think pediatrics is a little bit different than the NICU because you're dealing with, premature babies, but you're also dealing with families.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot there. There's a lot of
There is a lot.
emotional ties to the families and protection of the kids, but it feels like there's either one or the other. It's like you feel passionate about working with adults or you're passionate about working with kids, but it's
Yeah.
funny just to it's funny to hear the different perspectives of people, like
It's so
yourself.
interesting that she said that. I exactly. I feel the same way about pediatrics, and it's so much work because you're treating the patient, you're treating the family, you're talking with everyone back and forth, and it's such a delicate, sort of a lot of times they can't share their symptoms. So I think, yeah, adult oncology is where I ended up landing.
Yeah. So I'm really interested to hear when you and your husband decided to move to come to the United States. Were you already married at the time, or
Yes,
okay?
yes, yeah.
And so, what was that decision like? Had you ever had, first of all, had you ever been to the United States prior to coming here?
No, no, I had not. So my first visit to the United States was to take my USMLE, some of the tests that I had to take in order to apply for residency. So that was my first visit, and it was, we have a lot of family here, so it wasn't a very difficult adjustment. And then just applied for residency, and thankfully we were in the same region.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So what? Um, as someone who grew up in the United States, I'm always curious to know, like what was the draw to come to the United States versus what your career would have been like if you had stayed in India?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And, now that I'm sort of in my early 40s, I always think about it, life here, life there, and what did I trade off and what did I, gain here. But, I think definitely the academic medicine and the research and the scope for translational and clinical research here is much, the opportunities are significantly more advanced. So I always felt like and I am married to academic medicine since the very beginning when I went into medicine. So I felt that this would be the right place for me to be able to continue and pursue my work. I mean, opportunities in India are excellent too, and there's a lot of oncology. But I just had, where it was drawn to the academic life here.
Yeah, and I often talk about mentorship and how important that is, and wondering, first of all, were there mentors in India that inspired you? And certainly, I'm sure that since you've been in the United States, you've had mentors that have impacted you along the way. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, absolutely. I think mentors are, they are so critical in your choices and in your, especially in the academic field. So when I was in India, I spent some time at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which is one of our premier medical schools, and Dr. Lalit Verma, he's one of my mentors, and he's an excellent clinician and researcher, and he really, taught me a lot about oncology, and I spent a lot of time with him in clinics and doing some retrospective researches. And then once I moved here and I joined my fellowship at the Albert Einstein Medical School at Montefiore, my mentor was Dr. Amit Verma, and Amit is a malignant hematologist and a translational researcher. I have to say that the first 2 years of my hematology oncology fellowship training were really driven towards malignant heme. I loved and was very passionate about leukemia research, and a lot of my projects and research work was in malignant hematology. So I spent a lot of time with Dr. Verma, and he really was an excellent mentor and gave me such amazing, wise advices. And I know he has mentored dozens and dozens of trainees.
Yeah, it's funny how there definitely are certain people. I talk about my surgeon, Doug Mathieson, and how many people he trained, the people who are like in the same age category that you're in.
Mhm.
A lot of the people that I know who are surgeons in our field, either trained with Doug Mathieson or knew all about him, or um, it's just really inspiring that there are certain figures, in medicine. And then, of course, you get to the point where then, of course, you are probably already mentoring people, the next people behind you. I just love that about science and medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is teaches us so many things, and you can have more than one mentors and learn so many things from each one of them. Absolutely. No.
And so so between Mount Sinai and Montefiore, and now, of course, you're in Rhode Island. You spent a lot of your time in the Northeast. Was that on purpose, or was that just how things kind of played out?
Yeah, when I moved from India, I came to New York City, and so New York City was like the perfect setup. I didn't feel very different. There were a lot of people around, and it just kind of felt like home. So I think moving out of New York was my first sort of experience. But the my move to Rhode Island, and your question about staying in the New England region was more serendipitous. Actually, my husband, when he finished his medical training, he moved to Rhode. He had to find a position in Rhode Island. With his visa requirements. So that is when I sort of started looking, and this was around second year of my fellowship when this happened, and I remember that is the time when nivolumab came out, and it was the first immunotherapy approved in lung cancer, and it sort of was like the fanciest thing in the past decade for lung cancer with the immune checkpoint inhibitor, and we had a lot of trials at Montefiore with it, but it received its FDA approval. So I think it was around in my second year when I started really developing this interest in thoracic oncology, and so that kind of evolved. And then my husband, found his position in Rhode Island, and so that's when I started looking into Brown, and the Brown Cancer Center was growing and really sort of expanding their oncology program, their translational and basic research groups. So yeah, it sort of all happened a little coincidentally and a little bit of everything all together.
That's awesome. Well, yet people who know me probably know that I had a son who went to the University of Rhode Island, and so I've spent a fair bit of time in Rhode Island and love Rhode Island actually. And so from talking to you, it sounds like you also do, and you've embedded yourself into the community there, and I'm sure that you're very happy there. And of course, we also have some mutual friends from New York, like Brendan Stiles and Elaine Shum, who it's just funny how you just mention names, and it's like there's certain names that always bubble to the top, you know. It's like, and we'll be at TTCLC soon, and we'll see. It'll be like
Yes.
a reunion week, right? Because you see all these people at a smaller conference, which I think is really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Elaine and I trained together, and Dr. Holmo, Sarah, one of our thoracic mentors. So yeah, it's going to be all exciting meeting everyone at TTLC.
Well, it's interesting. I just for him, I was I'm on a steering committee for a clinical trial, and we're actually publishing a paper that'll be under his name, but my name will be on it too, hopefully, which is very cool. Be the
Excellent.
first time I've ever been published.
Oh, it's exciting. Yeah, no, it's clinical trials and shaping the trials early on and the inclusion exclusion criteria. These are all such critical things. And thank you for doing that.
Yeah, for sure. And so now that you've established yourself in Rhode Island, the breakfast that we were at together was very interesting because I learned a lot, and I know that you are doing a lot of research. I know you're passionate about screening, and I'd love to have you talk to us about some of the, I guess what I would say is the encouraging or success stories that I see that you've relayed to me, in Rhode Island, our smallest state, uh, but yet impactful. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your interest in screening and some of the research that you're doing in Rhode Island?
Yeah, Rhode Island is a fairly small state, as you know, Dave. And I think when I moved here, for me, a lot of it was learning. In the first 2 3 years, I sort of was getting to know the community and understand. And I think soon I realized that, the challenges in the state were also sort of the advantages that we had. It's a small community, well knit health system, and not a lot of tertiary centers, but there is the one big tertiary system, which I'm part of, healthcare system. And so we were very uniquely placed in a position where we whatever we wanted to implement or help coordinate within the community, it would be easy to sort of roll it out in a sort of a stage fashion. And not to mention that contrary to the belief that I had, Rhode Island population is very diverse. We have a huge Portuguese community. We have a large Vietnamese and Asian community, Greek population, African American, Hispanic. So it's very diverse, and it's sort of like spread across the state within pockets. So I thought, and then the more I learned about and actually over the past years within the ASCO meetings too, the more we're moving into the advances and novel treatments in the early stage of lung cancer. We're understanding that we're seeing more early stage cancers, and we want to be seeing more early stage than metastatic disease, but then we also want to be picking up more of these. And that's sort of where it backtracked to screening, is that colon cancer screening and breast cancer screening, those rates are in double digits, most of them over 50%. Eligible patients are screened, but in lung cancer, we're in single or double digits, and the highest rates were 10 to 15%. And these are depending on what states you're looking at. I think the American Lung Association, they roll out their estimates every year, and in their recent estimate, the national average was 16%, which means 16% of eligible patients are getting screened. In the state of Rhode Island, because it's a smaller state, and I think our healthcare systems are better intertwined and the radiology groups are better but connected, our cancer screening rates are fairly higher. When I started about 5 years ago, I think the rates were still about 9 to 10%, and this year the estimated rates are about 28.6%, and that's fairly higher than the national average. Again, these are, I think, estimates and population-based estimates from the ALA. From the ALA data that recently came out, but I thought this was very impressive, and partly it's the community work and the outreach within the systems that we're continuing. And you had asked, I'm sorry, I'm going on and on, but you had asked about the research that I had started, and about 3 or 4 years ago, I put together a proposal where I wanted to partner with a large community-based healthcare practice and be able to work with them on trying to increase the navigational support for lung cancer screening. Because in my survey within primary care providers and several populations across the state, the ones which serve the underserved communities, or the communities of belonging to minority groups, their screening rates were less than 5%. And the majority of the challenge was prior authorization, radiology referrals, putting in the orders, getting the process and the logistics going, not as much the patient not agreeing to, and not as much the doctor not wanting to do it. So I think it was all logistics that we thought was a big chunk of it. So we started this research program where we hired a navigator with the help of a pilot grant funding from the WIN Career Development Award. A navigator was hired, and she was bilingual. She spoke English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and she was sort of placed within this community practice, and she helped educate, counsel patients, and help them through with the navigational component. And that really proved to be very very successful. We saw excellent results after the end of the 3 year of her work. And I think the hope is that we can continue to scale that out into other groups across the state and share our experience.
And that was specific to screening.
That was
That
specific to lung cancer
lung
screening
cancer screening. Yep.
because many other screening, I think as I said, a lot of the colon cancer and breast cancer screening groups, their numbers are excellent and they have better uptake than lung cancer screening.
Yeah, we in our community, we of course we talk about that, we lament a lot about how bad the screening rates are and sort of the reasons behind it. And I think this navigation component, I think, is really important. I think navigation across a lot of different
Mhm.
ways that we interact with patients is really critical. And I feel like, I live in Massachusetts. I would assume that the screening rates in Massachusetts are probably, I would hope they're above average.
Yeah.
But I know in California, I've heard the late rates as low as 1% of eligible patients, which initially surprised me, but then it really didn't because it's such a huge state and
Yeah.
and sporadic, diverse in so many different ways. But it did kind of surprise me, that of all the states, California is one of the lowest. So we still have a ton of work to do. So the rates that you're talking about are significantly higher than what I'm used to hearing across the United States. So I think did that get renewed, that
So these are
grant
the
for the
grant.
navigation?
Yeah, the grant was about 2 to 3 years, so we just completed that grant. But we are hoping, so for colon cancer screening and breast cancer screening, in Medicare and Medicaid allows for reimbursement for a navigational position. So most of these programs, as you know, will have navigators. For lung cancer screening, that has not been the case. But as of January 2025, there have been some changes that will likely allow for navigators to be placed. And not just navigation, it has to be decentralized navigation. We can't have tertiary centers only being the places. It has to be in the community where the patients are meeting their doctors, where the patients are seeing their PCPs, and not an extra appointment for the patient to have to go to.
Does that include uh, mobile screening service? Is that part of what you're referring to?
That's an excellent point, and I'm so glad you brought it up. I was thinking about how to bring that up into the discussion because, so in Massachusetts and Rhode Island and many of the other states along the East Coast and the West Coast, we're doing much better with our cancer screening rates because we're smaller, we're well connected, imaging places are close by, and so, it's not a lot of logistic burden for the patient. But as you mentioned, some parts of California, the closest hospital is an hour away. The closest radiology center is an hour away. You look at states with the highest smoking rates, like some states like Arizona and New Mexico. These states, a lot of the healthcare centers and radiology and imaging places are really far. So these are the states where I think a lot of the mobile low dose CT scanners are going to be critical, where patients are going to be able to have access or bring access to the patients rather than bringing patients to the imaging. I know there are a few pharmaceutical companies that are working on funding such scanners. These are big investments, so it's certainly something that's going to be past the scope of individual health centers and health groups.
Well, that's a good point because one of my friends in North Carolina was responsible for getting a grant from a big pharma company to do, they call it the lung bus. And they had great success where they were out in rural communities, they were in Native American communities, and partnering with some of the taking it to the reservations, and I don't remember the numbers, but the numbers were something like going from like 5% to like 30%. It was ridiculous. It was so great
Absolutely, yeah.
because these some of these places, to your point, you could be. I'm from Minnesota. My goodness, my relatives live on the border of Canada, and it's 350 miles to Minneapolis. So,
Wow.
like, that's the reality check
That's
of
the
like
reality. Yeah.
that's like traveling from Providence to Philadelphia.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
that's literally how far that is. And so, can you imagine people are on in these places that are so tough to reach that it's just not equitable because
Yeah.
they don't get access because of those challenges, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Dave, to your point, one of the things that we did when we did this study is also we surveyed the patients, and we asked the patients about what their perceived barriers were. And interestingly, a lot of the patients said that most of them did not know that there's something like lung cancer screening, that they can get screened. And so awareness is one component, but once they're aware, there were very few patients who did not want to get screened. There is certainly that the whole concern about the patient guilt, and then the whole smoking stigma, and not knowing once you get a scan, and just opening a can of worms, as a lot of patients call it. But besides that, a big chunk of patients really were just challenged by logistics and access. And so I think those are things we can fix. And I know ASCO and a lot of these organizations, ISLC, are really committed to equity and better health care delivery.
Yeah, and I think certainly there are places where there is fatalism that comes into play where people either feel like they did it to themselves or they don't want to know or they, you know, and I know that that's a real thing as well. But if we can do better at the things that we can control, I think is the point that you're making that, some of that sort of cultural fatalism, might it just takes time over generations to like try to sort of change that. Like in Appalachia, I'm thinking of a woman she's a nurse navigator in Northeast Georgia, and so Northeast Georgia is like Tennessee, South Carolina. I mean, it's basically their catchment area is kind of like think of an Appalachia, and so there's very distinct differences, within those communities. But I think it's the things that we can control. It's that awareness piece is like it kind of goes all the way to like the conversations that people have with their primary care physicians. Do they even have a primary care physician? Because there's a crisis in Massachusetts right now, as you probably
Wow.
know, in primary care, where it's hard to get. I tried to get a new my primary care doctor retired, so I got a new one, and now she's moved to somewhere else. So I found another one, first available appointment. This was 2 weeks ago, November.
Wow. Yeah.
November. I'm like,
Oh my
wait,
goodness.
what? Are you serious? It was
Yeah.
January. You're talking about like 11 months from now. She's like, yeah.
But you're absolutely right. This is a big crisis across the country. In Rhode Island, all of my patients come to me, and one of the questions a lot of them ask is, "Can you find me a primary care physician?" And that's the reality. It's simple things like having a PCP, having even someone bring it up to you. Um, but one of the other things that you mentioned, Dave, which is really a very critical point, is the cultural barriers, and like the navigator you're talking about in that challenging area, dealing with different community populations with different cultural barriers, and sort of. And so I think, to that, one of the things we realize here in Rhode Island is that really bringing navigators that speak their language, navigators that belong to their healthcare centers, so they know that this is someone that we trust and we can talk to and will relate to us on our own terms. And finding community champions, one of the things we've tried to do is set up these community sort of advisory groups where we have involved like priests, like, say for example, example, from a community, and we're trying to set up more of these and get like barbers or just local leaders that are involved in the community to be able to relay that message, because you and I all know that it's more meaningful coming from someone that you know and speaks like you and looks like you.
Definitely, definitely, which is why in the city of Boston, again, where I live, and I don't live in the city, but I live just outside of Boston. But, you know, I think I had learned through a project I did in Boston that I want to say it was like 70% of the Asian Americans who live in the city of Boston were not born here.
Hmm.
And so language is a huge barrier within the Asian communities. There's multiple Asian communities, as you know, but there's a high population of Vietnamese and other cultures within the city of Boston. And Chinatown is kind of like shutting down, and because it gets so much more expensive, and it's hard to keep healthcare professionals at places in Chinatown and other community centers, where language is navigation and language are huge issues, which saddens me because in the city of Boston, you feel like it's just a wealth of healthcare options because
Yeah,
it's kind of a ground zero for a lot of research and care, but not everybody has access to that, which
to
is
that.
unfortunate, right? So the
Yeah.
work you're doing with these different cultures and the fact that you mentioned that Rhode Island is no different than Boston. I mean, there's a lot of diversity, that you mentioned, and so the work that you're doing is really impressive. And I learned that when I was at that breakfast recently with you, and you were sharing with it, and the audience was all excited, and it was really kind of cool that. Thank you for letting me into that world, so I learned a lot more about what's happening in our neighboring state.
Well, thank you for all your advocacy work and for informing your viewers and sharing all of these, exciting researchers across the country, but also your advocacy work with the longevity organization and LCRF. And I think, there's a big component of education and sharing the information with patients and providers that we still have to continue to do. Yeah, my
Yeah.
hope is that, we can try and roll out more of these navigational programs across the state. We've had meetings with other states, such as, New Mexico and New York, where they're really all still, and upstate New York City is different, but in upstate New York, they're all still struggling with increasing their cancer screening rates. So we're hoping that, we can all learn from each other's experience and continue to make this better.
Yeah, New York is another example of a huge state, where there's a lot of land, a lot of space in between,
In between.
in
Yeah.
between,
Yeah.
right? My
Yeah.
wife's from Western New York, so I've done that. I've
Oh,
traveled across New York so many times when our kids were
beautiful.
little.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so Hina, I know you're also involved with and have a passion for, translational research. Is there any particular research that you're super excited about that you want to share with us?
Yeah, so one of the really exciting projects that I'm working on, and that's something that I think is really going to translate into very exciting new approaches. And we're looking at this large database with the CARAS Precision Oncology Alliance on KRAS mutant non-small cell lung cancer patients and looking at their clinical outcomes, but really diving deeper into the co-mutation patterns and the different KRAS mutation types, because we do, as of now, we have a KRAS G12C inhibitor. We have a few of them now that are FDA approved. However, that still leaves the rest of the KRAS mutant population. And, it's about 30 to 40% of non-small cell lung cancers that have KRAS mutations. So we're really talking about a big proportion of our population that could potentially come into this sort of actionable driver mutations. So I think that diving more deeper into that KRAS population, understanding more about the co-mutation patterns and the clinical outcomes with each of those, and how knowing the co-mutation patterns can potentially in future predict our choices for immunotherapy and or any other potential therapy. So, that's a manuscript that's currently in preparation, and it's soon going to roll out. We presented our data at ASCO last year, and yeah, excited to roll that out soon.
That's very exciting because I know, again, I'm not, people know I'm not a scientist, but I know that KRAS used to be thought of as like this undruggable target. And I think again, from as a research evangelist, it's important for people to understand, that yes, when you hear about KRAS
Mhm.
G12 and you think of this, because I have friends who fit that, who are having, positive outcome from the treatment. But again, if you think about the percentage of, and maybe that's something that we can really highlight here, is that while yes, there's good news that there is something available, what kind of, like what percent of people with KRAS are not within that
Mhm.
population? Like what kind of, can you give us like a number or percentage, or like how big is that
Yeah.
opportunity?
No, and thank you for pointing that out. That's such an interesting perspective. When I was in first year of fellowship, I remember when we had a grand rounds at Montefiore, and the speaker came over and he said something that really stuck to me is that, KRAS has been the most disappointing target in medical oncology because for decades there were drugs that were tried, and then back in 2010, 2013, these drugs really didn't lead anyone anywhere. So KRAS sort of was dished out as, at least in GI malignancies. And then, it sort of made a comeback, and we had sotorasib and adagrasib. And so, when you look at non-small cell lung cancer landscape, about 30 to 40%, depending on what data sets you're looking at, 30 to 40% of non-small cell adenocarcinomas, they have KRAS mutant. Of those, only about, I believe it's about 20% or so are G12C. So you're still looking at the rest of the 80% of KRAS that does not have, a drug for them. So I think looking at pan KRAS inhibitors is one avenue that's still being explored. And every year at ASCO we see more drugs coming in that line. The other thing also is that the KRAS G12C inhibitors too. We still have a pretty large percentage of that population that doesn't respond to TKIs, and what is the molecular breakdown of those patients, and then just having, like, for example, co-mutations with STK11 and KEAP1 and how it impacts immunotherapy outcomes in that population. I think those are all things that are slowly going to make their way, and they're going to help personalize lung cancer treatment even further. Because so far, we're looking at 10 oncogenes and PDL1, but I think as we go deeper, these are all going to be further dissected out, and I think that'll bring really nice. Better options. I know the KRAS kickers are very passionate about I met some of them at ASCO, and it was very exciting to hear all the advocacy work that they do.
Yeah, for sure. And it's like I said, it's really exciting that, they're as excited as we get as research evangelists. We look at today versus 20 years ago and we're like, okay, it's been remarkable what has happened. And many of my friends, who are reaching the age now where they were in training back in the day when people scratch their heads saying, why would you want to go into lung cancer research? Because there was really nothing good happening back like when I was diagnosed, which is why I live a life of gratitude because I was very lucky. Here I am.
Yeah,
But we're just scratching the surface,
yeah,
I keep hearing, it feels like some days it's like, or like some quarters, it's like there's three or four things that have been approved or changed or updated or whatever. And it's so
yeah.
exciting, but yet there's still so much work to be done. And so we have to continue to invest in the research, right? And we're all in this together, right? So
Yes.
that includes the government, and it includes pharma, it includes academics, it includes venture capital, it includes all we're all
Everyone. Yeah.
literally we're all in this together, and we all have a role to play
Yeah.
to make these changes. But it feels like we're making some good progress.
Absolutely. I think every time I go to ask when I go and I walk out and come back on the on the way back, I think about how everything that's changing management or it's coming into the clinic. And it's really remarkable. Since 2017, I would say it's every year we've had such leaps in management, and this is all, like you said, it's we're really scratching the surface. We are going to continue to move forward, and I think it's a group effort.
It totally is. And for those who have never attended ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology conference is ginormous, and I go every year. But this past year, there was at least two sessions that I went to that there was like a standing ovation from the people in attendance, from from the doctors and nurses
Yeah.
and healthcare professionals who were in the audience, and patients, were literally
Yeah.
like
Advocate.
cheering
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
like, they give out these numbers of like 57 months or whatever. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
So it's exciting. So I mean, we could keep going on, and I love, I love spending time with you, Hina, and it's always fun to talk to you. But the one question I have to leave you with is, and I ask everybody, outside of work, tell us something that you're passionate about or that people may not know about you.
Oh, I have very young kids, so I feel like I'm a glorified chauffeur most of the time. I'm driving my kids to their activities and there. But I have to say that outside of work, what I really love to do is just really spend time with my kids. So we do a lot of, and Rhode Island's a beautiful state.
It
We
is.
we live 20 minutes from a beach, 20 minutes from a ski resort, and like 20 minutes from like apple orchards and strawberry farms. So there's always so much to do. So for now, I think in every phase of life, I feel like if you ask me this question in 10 years, it'll be a different answer. But now it's mostly just trying to get out of work and spend time with my kids and do things with them and just enjoy it, because in oncology, one thing you learn is that you only live once, and nobody knows what the future holds for any of us. So I just live every day thankful.
I love that. And by the way, as someone who has three boys who are older now, I remember those days. But I can tell you that the trajectory is my kids are in their 20s now, and they're like traveling. In fact, two of my boys are going to Guatemala tomorrow.
Wow. Oh, fun.
They go hiking. They went to Machu Picchu. They've been to Iceland and Norway, but yet they still love
Amazing.
to hang out with us. And so
Yeah.
it's amazing to as you go through different chapters as your kids grow. It's like that's a great chapter, and you think that you'll never get better than that chapter, but it gets better. It feels like every chapter it builds upon the previous chapter, you know.
Oh. Oh, that's
And
amazing. I love hearing that, David, because like you said, it's different chapters, and 5 years ago was a different sort of. That sounds so
absolutely.
exciting. Thank you for sharing that.
It is. And thank you for sharing that that's one of the things that you're passionate about. And I totally appreciate that. So, Hina, thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that you do. I know that you and I will probably see each other. I think you're speaking at the next conference in California. So I'll have to look that up and make sure that I hear your talk about the pan KRAS
And
work that you're talking
yeah.
about, which is very exciting. But thank you so much for what you do, and thank you so much for being on my program. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dave, for having me. And yeah, I'll look forward to meeting you again in 2 weeks at Huntington Beach.